Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beeson Family Podcast. We've got a great podcast for you as we're going to be joined here in the first segment along with the second segment. It's going to be a two-part chat with our good friend Curtis Rogers. He does amazing work over at 710 Sports out there in Seattle, Washington, and we're going to be chatting with him about the, I guess you'd call it new look pack. I would call it the Pac-12, but they had two teams, now they've got six teams. I like the six-pack. We're going to be going with that, but we're going to be chatting with him about just where they go moving forward in terms of that conference, how it's really not going to be affecting this year, but it's going to be affecting future years, expectations for those teams in the Mountain West, along with those two teams that are going to be in the WCC for this year in Washington State and Oregon State. And then on top of that, a few teams that our good friend Curtis is looking at that he's a little bit bullish/bearish on. We're going to be giving a little bit of love to the ACC here on this podcast, so we're going to have a great chat with Curtis. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, please do fire those in, as we are now 7 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season. I want to get you guys as prepared as seemingly possible, as we are done pretty much with all the transfer portal movement. We've got these rosters all set in stone. Now it's getting into the nitty-gritty, so let me know what you want me to hit upon on this podcast to get you as set as seemingly possible, and you've got one or two ways to be able to fire in these questions/comments, what have you. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Jadon_D1. Keep in mind, Larry M, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And we did not get in any of those Twitter/X questions today, so do me a solid, send those in, but I'll do you guys a solid here and get on one of our most solid guests. That'd be Curtis Rogers. He does absolutely amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports, doing a little bit of everything, whether that be Seattle Mariners pre- and post-game hosting, taking a look at the Washington State Cougars, the Washington Huskies, as it's been a banner week out there in the Pacific Northwest, taking a look at the Seattle Seahawks, what they're doing in the NFL as well. So busy times out there in the Pacific Northwest, and you're able to follow Curtis on Twitter/X along with Instagram at A Kid From Kent all together. And Curtis, always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, always happy to join you. And we're just going about our business this week all of a sudden. And then it was late night. I think it was late Tuesday night around like 11:45 p.m. Pacific time. We get the news that Washington State and Oregon State have extended agreements to 4 Mountain West schools to rebuild the Pac-12, and has thrown this college realignment even more so into chaos. Just when we thought things were settling down, it ramps back up again. Like you said, it's a brave new world that we are now in, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon.
No, it does not. And as we know, with football restrictions and the rules are set in place, the Pac-12 does need to get up to at least 8 teams. And just what do you expect moving forward for these Pac-12 teams? Because as of right now, they've got a nice geographical footprint, but we've seen in the way of college sports with the Big Ten, the ACC, really everyone outside the SEC, that they're spanning multiple time zones. And I think that it is going to be interesting to see what that next move is, because when it comes to the Pac-12, if they're able to keep a relatively tight geographical footprint, I think that that actually could be good for them. And in terms of just the home court advantage, it actually does lessen it a little bit more than, say, in the Big Ten, where you've got a team like Rutgers having to travel all the way out to Los Angeles and vice versa.
Right. I think, like you mentioned, football moves everybody to the front of the line in terms of football school versus basketball school, and not just a basketball school, but a basketball-only school. I think anytime a conference out west realigns, all eyes turn to Gonzaga, because everybody kind of wonders, like, what's Gonzaga still doing in the WCC? But because they don't have a football program, it really puts them behind, I think, a lot of schools that the Pac-12 would be interested in. Also, people kind of look at Stanford and Cal as obvious ads, and sure, from a geographic standpoint, it makes a lot of sense as well. But they're getting more exposure in the ACC right now than they did in the final years of the Pac-12. And also, Stanford and Cal have not been ones to really want to align themselves with schools that aren't up to their academic standards. A school like Stanford, I don't think wants to be in the same conference as one with, say, Boise State, that was only a community college about 25 years ago. Not to disparage any Boise State alums that might be listening, or to anybody that's gone the community college route. I myself have plenty of community college credits. It's a great way to get an education, but it's not a Stanford degree. I don't think anybody can be surprised when you make that comparison. So football, unfortunately, it moves everybody to the front of the line, which means I've heard schools such as like Tulane or Memphis, which are far outside of the Pac-12 footprint right now. They would be of consideration because they have a football program, a couple of competitive teams, at least over the last, 10 or so years. And then they're also in the Memphis TV market and the New Orleans TV market, which aren't, top 20 markets or anything like that, but it still beats, again, not to disparage the good folks of like Laramie, Wyoming or anything, but that's kind of why I don't see Wyoming getting an invite. I don't see really Hawaii getting an invite. San Jose State, probably not either. There's going to be, unfortunately, some leftovers from the Mountain West, the old Mountain West, that probably won't get an invite. But just in terms of teams that make sense right now, it's really weird. It could be anybody at this point.
Yeah, it is going to be so interesting to take a look at for this, shall we say, different Pac-12. I would say new improved, but I think the word improved cannot be utilized here. As joining me on the show, we've got Curtis Rogers, who does amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. And just what are your expectations for those 6 teams that are going to be in the Pac-12 this year? Because as we know, this is not going to be taking hold at the very earliest until the 2025-26 season. Schedules have already been made. Hayes in the barn there. So what we're talking about with regards to the new look pack, because right now it's a pack 6, we'll just call it a 6-pack because that sounds absolutely delicious, but that's a case where that's a little bit more down line. But in terms of these teams this year, I do feel like with the pack, they actually grabbed, in terms of the basketball schools, 3 of the 4 better ones, with Fresno State bringing up the rear, in my opinion. And then with Washington State and Oregon State, I think it's going to be so intriguing to see what we get out of them this year.
Yeah, I agree with you about the quality of college basketball among these 6 schools. You look at the programs that Boise State, Colorado State, and San Diego State have built over the last little bit here. They've been very impressive, with San Diego State being the best of those 3, I would say, obviously with Brian Dutcher, and just how great that Aztecs program has been, ever since, Steve Fisher took over all those years ago. Nico Medved has built something really good at Colorado State. And Leon Rice, he has always been mentioned in college head coaching searches out west because that Boise State program has been very competitive too, making the NCAA tournament a few times under his leadership. Really like those additions from a basketball standpoint. And then what Washington State was able to accomplish last year, making it back to the NCAA tournament. There's potential, Greg, for this conference to be really, really fun in terms of college basketball, in terms of those late night games that we all tune in for, that us college basketball sickos just absolutely love, where you don't even know what channel you're on, and all of a sudden you find yourself watching some late night college basketball. So I think the potential of the new Pac-12 in terms of college basketball, it could be really, really fun. Obviously, it's not the glory days of UCLA or Arizona or Stanford or anything like that, but you're just trying to get eyeballs on your conference. You're just trying to get attention, and I think these schools have really done that. And so in their respective conferences right now, I still think San Diego State is going to be a really fun team to watch in the Mountain West. They're always in the conversation for the Mountain West Championship. And then Washington State and Oregon State in their 2 years in the WCC, I think those 2 teams can really make some noise, considering, they're going to, I think from a revenue standpoint, they're going to be among the more high profile schools in the WCC. In terms of like national recognition, I think only Gonzaga probably would have more, maybe St. Mary's too. So you've got an opportunity for both of those schools to really gain some traction in the WCC this season. I think Washington State is probably better suited for it right now, especially considering how hot Wayne Tinkle's seat is at the moment. But I think right now, Washington State has a really good shot at making some serious noise in the WCC, and then all those schools that are still in the Mountain West for the time being, I like San Diego State probably the most of those ones.
I'm right there with you, and I think that this is a good stopping point for part 1 before we get into part 2, taking a look at just how wide open the Mountain West is this year. Certainly they're not going to be getting 6 teams in the NCAA tournament, but how do we take a look at this conference? The teams that are going to be moving to the Pac soon, how are they going to be able to fare? On top of that, I know that Curtis has some thoughts with a few ACC teams as well, so we're going to be chatting about that and so much more on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by Curtis Rogers. He does such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. You're able to follow him on Instagram /Twitter/X at @ekid He really does cover a little bit of everything, as this time of year he does Seattle Mariners pre- and post-game mode, saying he's getting set for the Seattle Kraken. He's been doing great work with the Seattle Seahawks, obviously the Washington Huskies, and so much more. And Curtis, we were leaving off talking about the Mountain West, and I contend that this is very much a wide open conference this year. We recall the 6 teams that were able to make it into the NCAA tournament 8 seasons ago. Certainly we're not going to be seeing that. The public perception around them is quite a bit down after what we saw last year in the NCAA tournament. It feels like teams not named San Diego State have had a little bit of a rough time, but someone like a Donovan Dent over at New Mexico, I think, is a very intriguing player. I like the fact that Boise State has back guys like Tyson Dagenhart and company, and I do think that when it comes to Mountain West, we should see a lot of intriguing teams, and I almost look at them as almost like the Atlantic 10 from a few years ago, where you didn't necessarily have that dominant team, but you had like 4 or 5 teams that were like sort of fringe bubble teams. You sort of knew that these teams were going to be very reliant upon winning that conference tournament, but all those teams, if they could get into the NCAA tournament, could really be a force.
Yeah, I think that is going to be something that is certainly a real possibility. And, you know, when you're playing great competition night in and night out, I think it really makes you battle tested come tournament time. I get that that was a big hang up with the old Pac-12 is just how many conference games they played against each other. But, I mean, they had some really good teams near the end. And I think you definitely learn a little bit more about yourself when you play a tougher conference schedule. I think that may be a reason why Gonzaga has slipped up, you know, near the end of a lot of these NCAA tournaments, is that you're not playing your toughest games near the NCAA tournament. You're kind of taking your foot off the gas pedal a little bit. Not to say that Gonzaga has been a disappointment by any stretch of the imagination, but I really think that when you are challenging yourself in conference play, in addition to the non-conference, I think you're able to get a much better picture of the kind of team that you are. I think this new group of Pac-12 schools, whoever it is that they add to it, I think is going to make for a really fun brand of basketball. And hopefully they're going to be nice and battle-tested come tournament time. We see maybe 2, 3, 4 teams get in, because I think the talent is certainly there. And hopefully with the dispersal of the previous Pac-12, the eyes that were on that conference haven't been distracted elsewhere, and that, you know, there's still a lot of attention paid to it, because I think there's potential for some really good quality basketball getting played.
And I'm so glad that you talked about the eyes potentially being on the Mountain West as well, because do you think that it might be a little bit of an advantage that we have seen so much realignment with having the schools in California going over to the ACC, obviously the Big 12 and the Big 10 poaching away so many of those schools as well, because that means that, in my opinion, there's going to be a lot more games out there on the East Coast. There's going to be a lot more 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern time tips. And that means that someone needs to get some airtime when it comes to like 10, 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. And that leaves the Mountain West, the Big West, and, well, you always have the game out there in Hawaii that gets to be a nice standalone. That's part of the Big West as well. But I look at these schools that are currently out west, especially those mid-majors and the Mountain West. I think that they could be big winners for this upcoming season, to where people that wouldn't necessarily see them on a night-to-night basis, now they're the only game in town in some cases with the way that the schedule is going to shake out.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big reason why these conferences, you know, went after a lot of these West Coast programs, is to get those late-night TV time slots. And, you know, even when you have West Coast teams get moved into a more prime time slot, that we're probably going to see, you know, a lot of schools like Arizona not play so late at night anymore, especially considering that, you know, the majority of their opponents play in the central time zone. That means you're not going to see games tip off at 7, 8 p.m. West Coast time. You're probably going to see them play a lot more, you know, 4 or 5 p.m. West Coast games, which means that's more opportunities for, you know, Mountain West teams, more opportunities for WCC teams to get the eyes of these national TV broadcasts. So, yeah, I think there is going to be a benefit for the teams that are still out west in terms of where their conference's geographic footprint are. And I think of a school like Gonzaga, where, you know, a lot of their conference games are not nationally broadcast. They're broadcast locally up here for sure on Root Sports, but you're not going to see too many conference games of Gonzaga's spanning the WCC get broadcast nationally, because how big of a draw is Portland? How big of a draw is Grand Canyon and Loyola Marymount? Not to hate on those schools, but I can understand why Gonzaga St. Mary's gets the ratings it does because those are two proven programs. But now you're going to have more open time slots for those teams, and I think it's going to be a big benefit to those that have stayed on the West Coast, have put roots down here because somebody's got to fill those time slots. The networks will make sure that happens because that is some valuable TV time. That's some valuable commercial airtime. And it's not going anywhere just because everybody seems to have switched conferences as of late.
Yep, absolutely. And when it comes to recruiting as well, those that want to be seen by their friends and family out there on the West Coast do think that that's a little bit of a benefit for these teams as well. As we do have Curtis Rogers, who does such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly what has been the buzz this week in college sports is everything that's happening with the new pack, going from the Pac-2 to the six-pack, and we shall see if there's going to be more moving forward. But just in terms of the way that you're preparing for the upcoming season, is now we are less than 50 days away from the start of the college basketball season. We are starting to get there. Just are there a few teams that are popping out to you as the teams that you're keeping your eye on, whether that's a team that you're feeling bullish on, or it could be a team that just as you're looking, as you're hearing things from them, you're just not feeling as great about them and you feel like they might be a little bit overhyped?
Well, one team I'm kind of looking at and maybe looking for them to build off of the finish to the season they had last year is Clemson, where they made it all the way to the Elite Eight a year ago. I think they've got the pieces in place to make a return to the NCAA tournament. Really like Chase Hunter. It looks like he's going to be emerging into a bigger role this season. I think that's a team right now. Brad Brennell is their head coach, really getting them back to the NCAA tournament and building off of that. That's always been kind of a weird program to me, Greg. When I think of Clemson, I think of underachievement. Last year, them making it all the way to the Elite Eight was huge for them. And I expect them to make it back to the NCAA tournament, maybe even make some noise this year. I think that is going to be a team to watch in the ACC. And I really think that they're a team that if you're buying stock in a team that maybe people are starting to overlook right now, maybe a team that's not quite in the preseason top 25s that we're seeing out there, or maybe somebody a little bit on the outside. I think Clemson's a team right now that I'm looking at as one that could probably play above where people are kind of expecting them to be this year.
And I'm so glad that you bring that up as well, because I feel like those top two teams in the ACC are pretty ironclad in Duke and North Carolina. But after that, I think that's pretty open, because I do think that Wake Forest is going to be in for a good year. But I feel like there's just a big, giant middle in the ACC. And if Clemson can duplicate what they did last season, I think that there's going to be a lot of wins to be had. And if they're able to excel in the ACC, I think that that's going to stand out to a lot of people. And I think that there is a lot of upside with them, to your point.
Yeah, that ACC is going to get crowded. You look at a team like Miami as well in that conference. Who knows where they're going to be? I would expect them to still be competitive and still maybe make a run at the NCAA tournament. But right now, like you said, this ACC conference, it is really up for grabs, like outside of Duke and North Carolina. I think those two schools, Cooper Flagg is obviously going to rule college basketball this season. I'm very excited to watch him play. And then obviously North Carolina bringing back so much talent. The ACC is a weird one to me too, especially when you add SMU, you add Stanford and Cal. It's going to be weird to see how those teams produce in that conference, especially because I look at Cal as a team on the upswing. Not necessarily a team that is NCAA tournament ready right now, but definitely a team that is much more competitive than in years past. And then I'm interested to see, too, how Kyle Smith is going to work things at Stanford. Really interested to see how he is going to be able to build off of the momentum that he had at Washington State. He's bringing over most of his staff from, Pullman, and really trying to build something special there, trying to get Stanford back to their, past glory days. So I think that ACC, you're dealing with some wild cards, but all in all, it should make for some very competitive basketball this year.
Yep, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well, because I think that what else is big for the ACC is that, well, you don't necessarily have as many top-flight teams. Those teams that have been big, giant, rusty anchors in past years, like Louisville the last few years, my goodness, they were absolutely terrible. They should be a whole heck of a lot better this year. And when you're not taking those like sub 200 Ken Baum losses, that should be help out the cause quite a bit and always helping out the cause is you, Curtis. You do such an amazing job taking a look at this great game of college basketball and a little bit of everything. If it's out there in the Pacific Northwest, you're doing a great job of taking a look at it. And heck, I know you're getting set for some hockey as well, of all things, with the Seattle Kraken getting going sooner rather than later, too. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, it is very busy this time of year, and I love it because there's never a slow news day, and it's incredible. But yeah, you can follow along on Twitter and Instagram. At a Kid from Kent, seattlesports.com is the place to be. If you want any more information on the Pac-12 realignment, we had college football insider Brett Murphy on the show this week to kind of talk about where the 6 schools go from here. So some good insight there, but always a great time talking to you, Greg. Can't wait for our next conversation. You have yourself a great one.
Absolutely. We are getting closer and closer to the start of the upcoming college basketball season. I know that Curtis, he, much like myself, very amped up for it. He is ready for it, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Curtis for joining me on Coast to Coast Soups, now part of the Beastman Family podcast. And if you do like sharing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, I have one or two ways we offer those in. First one, my Twitter/X timeline at G_41. Keep in mind, Lord ZM, name does not matter. So per usual, please send these into the timeline, and other ways find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And we've got conference previews continuing to come out. We're down to 6 in total: the American, the ACC, and then you get to your big boys, the Big 12, the Big East, the Big 10, the SEC. And then once we do all of those, we're set for an absolutely amazing college basketball season. I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season, off season, rain or shine, and I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. So thank you so much for tuning in.